Hi, this is Mark Goldberg from UN Dispatch and the American Prospect Magazine, and I'm speaking with...
Matthew Lee from Inner City Press, innercitypress.com at the UN.
Speaking from the UN itself. Yes.
About the UN, but not for the UN.
About the UN, from the UN. So Matthew, you just got back from a briefing about Darfur. Actually, not about Darfur, interestingly you say, but with the head of peacekeeping operations, Jean-Marie Guéhenno. And who was there?
Yeah, it was kind of. It came together very quickly. It was a hush-hush briefing by the head of peacekeeping, Mr. Guéhenno, in advance of a trip that he's making to China, leaving this weekend, getting there Sunday, and spending 3 days in China. And it was. You'd think, the most of the invitees were Chinese state media invitees. All of who, they're based here. They're very nice people, but it was sort of structured. That's why it was kind of hush-hush and. The Mr. Guéhenno's prepared remarks were mostly about, China was, since 2002, has been contributing so many more troops to the UN, peacekeeping troops and police in the Congo, in Haiti, and that it's a tremendous trend, and he's going really to sort of congratulate China for its engagement in peacekeeping, which is all, they have contributed more troops, there's no question. In fact, I think that he said of the permanent 5 members of the Security Council, China is now the second biggest peacekeeping contributor behind France, i.e. more than the U.S. And UK and Russia.
And you say France's contributions are almost exclusively limited to Lebanon.
That's correct. He made that point, and he also, just to get the fact, he said China is now the 13th largest peacekeeping contributor, which obviously, then if you really go down, it's like Pakistan, Bangladesh, and a question arose about that. But I think that of a more general interest, in sort of not sneaking in there, but I mean, it's a briefing for the press, the Asian press. The internet is read everywhere, and I'm a quarter Chinese, so I went. And the way DPKO tried to structure it was very much to keep saying, let's get back on point, meaning pointing to the Chinese journalists and staying on this message of the UN likes China, keep giving troops. But the biggest controversy right now in peacekeeping is the upcoming peacekeeping mission in Darfur, UNAMID. And whether the Sudanese government will accept troops or even helicopter pilots from anything other than African countries and China. They also do like China. It's unclear. Right. It's unclear. Heviku.
And Mr. Guéhenno this week even suggested, shockingly, I think, that the peacekeeping mission stands a chance of failure if member states don't pony up.
That was a pretty amazing
troops. I mean, that for a head of peacekeeping operations to warn or that a mission might fail before it even sort of gets off the ground is pretty shocking, because the UN, for better or worse, they tend to be sort of optimistic and sort of best case scenario planning most of the time.
That was a shocking statement.
But it's pretty shocking. And what he says is it's pretty basic. They say 24 helicopters, among which 6 should be attack helicopters. And so far, no member state has stepped forward and offered sort of their equipment to use for UNAMID. And unless they get these helicopters, the mission just sort of lacks the critical, what they call force multipliers, to operate effectively.
I think there was more. No, you're absolutely right, and I'll go back to this briefing in a second. But this is the more substantive. That's the real thing. He briefed the council, and he came out and he said, and he when he came out of the council, not today, but this was in the middle of the week, he tried, I think, to be very even-handed. So he made a double critique. I mean, he went out of his way to say, Sudan, things are not going well, and the problems are twofold. Sudan, because they are not agreeing to accept certain troop contributing countries.
Right.
There's an offer on from Thailand but then he said he sort of and it came off as a critique of of the developed world for having said they were so concerned about Darfur but not offering the helicopters. The only thing in this case there's a problem, because it's become pretty clear that Sudan will not accept helicopter pilots from Europe or the United States.
Right. You're right.
And it's
also, we should back up because Sudan, sort of the government of Sudan, has placed a condition of deployment of troops that they be from African countries.
And so that no country, as Guéhenno actually just said upstairs, in a way, in this case, the critique of sort of like the first world not producing the copters
Right.
is superficial, because who knows if the UK said,
Yeah.
we'll give 6 fighter helicopters, but they have to be flown by our pilots, and Sudan
Right.
said, no way.
Well, presumably, if the UK said that, they would be sort of, in a position, at least the UN Secretariat as well as the member states would be in position to cajole Sudan into accepting the offer.
I don't think so.
Get on the table.
They haven't really cajoled them into accepting much.
First.
Right. No. You'd
well,
think
that's the problem.
Yeah, no.
You need to like sort of maybe make the offer and force Sudan to say no. Or hopefully twist their arm.
I think they've said openly that they will not
don't
accept pilots from the first world. I don't think they're ashamed of that position. In fact, there's a story that came out earlier this week where they said that they turned down offers of sort of a technical unit from the Nordic countries, saying that they believed they were agents of the Mossad and CIA. So they're not playing hide the ball. I think if Sweden said, I don't know if Sweden has fighter helicopters, but if they do, I think that Sudan would say no dice. And so,
right. I mean, and this is something we I think circle back to almost every time we talk about Darfur. Is sort of, I think this speaks to the just sort of lack of pressure being applied to Sudan bilaterally from member states of the United Nations, from China, from the United States even. We talk a good game, but we're not sort of on like our hierarchy of foreign policy priorities.
Definitely.
Sudan doesn't rank in the top 5.
I actually had a thought about this week that you may from our previous conversation. I know it's very rare for me, but I actually I'm serious. Like I don't really know how it cuts politically, and I'm sure it's against everything that I've professed to believe in. But seeing this problem of the fighter helicopters, particularly the 6, like the idea that a $1.4 billion peacekeeping mission to save untold hundreds of thousands of people could be scuttled, as Guénaud threatened or predicted, for 6 fighter helicopters. I suddenly had this thought: why doesn't the UN set up a helicopter flying training school in South Africa for African pilots and just have? Because this is just so my belief is it's not just Sudan. I think the vast majority of UN peacekeeping operations are in Africa, and I think the AU is now on record as saying the preference, the best practice is African troops on African soil. So it's sort of I don't know if this would be in the model of sort of an African Blackwater. That's why I'm calling it a controversial idea. Or maybe it would be the UN paying. I think it would be money well spent to make sure to find a well-meaning European country that would be comfortable donating its equipment to well-trained African pilots. And then you'd resolve the problem, and it would be so much better spent than all this hoopla.
Right. But again, that seems to be a bit more of a long-term problem, solution. I think.
Why don't we just find? I'm sure there's 6.
Sense of like an urgency.
I'm sure that there's 6 probably highly skilled African helicopter pilots that could be found, and probably since the UN is willing to break its rules to pay Lockheed Martin $250 million, I think paying a $100,000 bonus to African helicopter pilots for this mission wouldn't be out of line. Right, you know what I mean?
I mean, listen, I think what like long term, what you say makes plenty of sense. Right. I think that there's like a sense of urgency. I think that's missing.
Sure.
When you have the head of peacekeeping operations saying we need 6 attack helicopters, and you just have, it falls on deaf ears for member states that actually have these helicopters and have formed units who ready to know how to fly these things. It just again speaks to the low priority that Sudan is on our on people's minds. We profess to care about what happens in Sudan. I think that too often our actions are sort of not as loud as our words.
Right. No, definitely. And in fact, maybe this is a good. I mean, here's the. I think it definitely is the member states. Although it's rare to be in defense of the UK, France, and the US these days for me. But I will say I don't disbelieve. I wouldn't be surprised if at least 2 of those 3 countries had offered copters with their own pilots and been turned down, or just knew they would be turned down. I wouldn't be surprised at all, and it wouldn't surprise me if then. I don't think the UN could strong-arm Sudan to accepting Nordic pilots. I don't think the UN could. Right. I think the member states could. You're right. Here's the missing link. What would make China do that? Now, obviously, China has a big economy. There are a lot of issues going on. But in this briefing this afternoon, when asked, Mr. Guénaud, who's flying there for 3 days with the Minister of Defense, Minister of Foreign Affairs, he said maybe the Office of the Prime Minister. he was asked directly, are you going to be raising the issue of China using its leverage to get, not just generally to stop genocide, because that would be a political and not a peacekeeping question, but to accept non-African helicopter pilots? He totally dodged the question. And it's not, in coming down and speaking to the other reporters that were there, I don't think it's on the agenda. I honestly don't. I think that although one would think that if the head peacekeeping official of the UN was going to China at this time with the Darfur standoff, that would be the main topic. Mm-hmm. I think they're taking a longer view, because everything he presented to the Chinese media was China has stepped up its commitment. It's now up to 10,000 troops. Everything is wonderful. So, I mean, I guess we'll have to, again, maybe they're being very diplomatic. Maybe the purpose of going there is to saying, we're praising you publicly, but please do more. But I'm not sure if the UN, certainly if the Department of Peacekeeping Operations sees that as its role. That's something that Ban Ki-moon could do, and maybe he does do it very quietly whilst on Antarctica or in Tunisia. He's been, for the last 10 days, he's been traveling the globe on a variety of issues, not helicopters. And he may have been making calls about helicopters. Nobody knows, Mm-hmm. But
well, so you started that sort of monologue there.
Sure, I'm sorry.
No. Sorry,
no.
That was the wrong.
I'm going to call it a riff, but I'm doing
the riff. I think riff is better, by asking what would make China sort of apply more pressure on Sudan to relent on all these onerous conditions that they're placing on the peacekeeping operation. I think one thing that could surely make a difference, but that hasn't been done yet, is more bilateral pressure from the United States to China. But again, I think I think I say this almost every time we speak, that the United States has a lot of other more pressing issues to raise with China than getting into a scrap over Darfur.
In fact, only yesterday.
And I say that this could be a good transition.
I'm watching.
One of the other pressing issues, of course, is Iran.
There we go.
And this morning, Friday morning, the Washington Post reported that in light of this, what China considers an exculpatory IAEA report on Iran's nuclear activity, China sort of canceled a previously scheduled meeting of the Security Council to talk about Iran that was supposed to take place after Thanksgiving.
Yep. That's true. They did, and actually, that was well done there. That was exactly
That was a good transition, right?
And not only did the Washington Post report it, which is obviously to be noted, but
did Inner City Press report it?
No, that wasn't my point. But yes, the answer is yes, of course. But the real thing that I was going to say is that U.S. Ambassador to the UN Zalmay Khalilzad took to the mic unannounced yesterday, but what he had to say was about Iran. It was to encourage China to stop, standing in the way of Security Council sanctions on Iran. So you are right. Like they had if the U.S. is looking at China and saying they really should do more on Darfur, they let that go by the roadside because of Iran. The only kind of like trickster thing I'd throw in there is that China had been threatening to not go to these Iran sanctioned meetings for some time, based on, guess what? Too many countries giving too many props to the Dalai Lama. So I think the one thing that's missing in the Post article is that it's not clear to me. I mean, I think of the P5, Russia is in fact viewed as much more closely aligned with Iran and providing it nuclear supplies and building reactors. I'm not sure how much money China is making in Iran, but China was on record saying if people keep greeting the Dalai Lama so openly, they're not going to play nice with the multilateral process on things that are important to those countries. And as the listeners may know, George Bush met with the Dalai Lama. Again, I'm not. So I think it's interesting to see. Like, then again, maybe is that just a sort of like a funny footnote to the story, or is that why China's doing it?
Well, I mean, I think it speaks, to the larger theme of China's growing dominance in global affairs.
Right. And also showing it's not that easy to push them around. I mean, it's not like, even if the U.S. said, unless the U.S. is willing to say, we're going to boycott all goods from China, or we're not going to the Olympics, or we're going to turn Steven Spielberg loose on you. The last one's a joke, but I mean, I think that carries a certain amount of weight, It's clearly.
Although as you said, Steven Spielberg, made this sort of film for Beijing '08 Olympics.
Oh man!
the Save Darfur community didn't like very much.
Did he get? Oh, because I know that he sort of rattled his saber or his camera in the past.
He did. This was a while back, though. This was I think a year ago.
Oh, okay.
Now.
No, he's rattled his saber since. I think that his threat is viewed very, the Spielberg sanctions are viewed as very seriously over there. I mean, I know that when he's Mia Farrow, I think less so. That I've had some feedback at the UN, people saying like, wait, wasn't she the one in those Woody Allen movies? So, I mean, she means very well.
So what happened? Steven Spielberg originally, like the Chinese government, I think, hired him, or somehow he was involved in the in the Olympics and in making a film for the Olympics, and the Save Darfur community was shocked and appalled at this. And I think because of them, Spielberg has sort of taken on a more aggressive role in trying to be a human rights
so somebody
champion.
actually applied multilateral pressure to Spielberg because he
There
did
you
rattle
go.
his saber and said, if think. I mean, I think that is those Olympics may be, the leverage. They seem to be very sensitive when that issue is raised, but.
Yeah, and this, again, this is actually, I think, why someone like Joey Cheek, who is a speed skater, an Olympic gold medal speed skater, has been a outspoken advocate for Darfur, and I think his effectiveness is sort of almost directly tied to the idea that China is very sensitive.
We had
I
can close my eyes and picture it now. We had a press conference of George Clooney, Don Cheadle, Joey Cheek, and I could.
There you go.
No, it really was. And so again, I don't mean to be flippant about it, but that would be. You're right. It's a conundrum, but it's. I think those again. It's like everything turns on these like 6 copters. You know what I mean? It really seems to me that like the international community should be able to solve this. There should be a way. Even if you view things entirely as Sudan has all of the blame. Somehow, that must be this copter issue should then be pushed to the max. Somebody should. I mean, I don't know if South Africa has copters, right? And if they don't, I'm sure the U.S. gives untold billions of foreign aid to Pakistan. How much would it cost the U.S. to give 6 copters to South Africa? So I go again, and I go back to are we really just missing 6 pilots? Is every and the final? I made reference to that. This Lockheed Martin thing. What's been unclear to me in looking at that contract, given that it was awarded on a sole source basis, in light of Gaino's new threat, that his threat was unless they get this, it might not be worth even going. That it might.
Well, I should say I think the reason he made that point was because a couple months ago, 10 African Union peacekeepers were killed because they're outgunned and outmanned by a group of Darfur rebels. And I think the reason helicopters are so effective is because the enemy are on Toyotas and on horseback. And if you look at peacekeeping missions in the Congo, people say the decisive moment in the Congo is when the Indian government sent 2 or 3 attack helicopters to eastern Congo, and they're able to actually repel some of the forces that were harassing civilian populations there. And so there are sort of crucial.
I don't disagree.
And also to the extent that Darfur is this enormous region. And there aren't enough peacekeepers to cover the whole region. That you need this sort of superior air power to deter attacks on civilians, and also deter attacks on peacekeepers themselves. Because if there was a large scale attack on a group of UN peacekeepers, as soon as they touched down, it would make, I think, troop contributing countries kind of skittish about having their people on the front lines there.
But can I actually? No. You're all exactly. I wasn't saying actually that Gaino was being unreasonable. Saying if we can't, to go in and suffer. I think he called it humiliation in the first weeks would be worse than not going. I was, as an aside, wondering what happens with the $250 million if they don't go, given this contract that was awarded to Lockheed Martin. But as you were saying that, it triggered this thought, which is that AMIS, the African Union force that's been in Darfur, has had some helicopters. But at Sudan's insistence, they were only allowed to fly, in the daytime. They were grounded. They were also, some people said they used to have the oil drained out of them. Various things happened. But so it's not enough to even have the copters. You have to have the copters and the will to say, we're not going to, even if Khartoum says don't fly, we're going to
Yeah.
fly. But that was lacking in the Amos Force. And one final thing is the UN has helicopters in what's called UNMI, the border between Ethiopia and
Yes.
Eritrea. And when Eritrea said don't fly, they didn't fly. So it's sort of, again, I'm not blaming the UN, but I'm saying there's a more fundamental problem, which is, and it really goes back to that. The UN only goes in with the consent of the government.
Right.
And if the government is unreasonable, what do you do? Despite all the statements of, never again and responsibility to protect, until now, if the government of Eritrea says you can't fly the copters, they're not flying the copters.
Right. I mean, I think, because the UN is not like an army. The UN doesn't have an army. They're not like an aggressive fighting force.
Right.
They depend on the consent of the, of the countries and of the population.
So we can both imagine them getting the copters,
well,
and there'd still be a problem. So I mean,
I think at that point, you need like a multinational force, or you need Chapter 7, enforcement provisions. You need all sorts of things that the UN depends on member states providing.
Right. Right. No. But I mean, I think UNMI, again, I'm almost thinking of this UNMI. It is a Chapter 7 mandate.
Yeah.
But but still in all, when one of the two combatants says we don't authorize you, they also every once in a while order out whole nationalities of peacekeepers, and the UN goes along with it. Again, I'm not saying the UN is wrong. Maybe that's something where
how,
the international
how
community...
could the UN not go? I mean, how do you not go along with that?
I don't know.
You depend. I mean, you have these status of forces agreement. Once one side starts not abiding by it, presumably, one could direct their national army against, lightly armed peacekeepers.
Right. No, absolutely. I guess don't get me wrong. I'm just wondering what the looking, and it's a definitely less visible UN peacekeeping mission, but the Ethiopia Eritrea UNMI mission, it's really been pretty much sort of abused on both sides, and it's followed the orders without a whole bunch of pushback from the international community.
Yeah, I mean, and this is we can. We can do the whole Horn of Africa if you want.
No, we could do some.
We can end in Somalia.
Actually, we should do Somalia because since we last spoke, Ban Ki-moon has put out a report saying no peacekeepers, too dangerous. The only thing he could see happening is a coalition of the willing. And like an idiot, I asked his spokesperson, have they talked to anyone who's willing? And she was like, willing by definition means whoever might step forward. I guess that means Ethiopia. I mean, I don't know. It seemed like if the UN is not. It was strange to issue a report that sort of was like, we're not, but there could be a coalition of the willing. So it's like, who's willing?
Well, I mean, so what's better than pretending that there's, that there will be peacekeepers in Somalia, or saying, saying flat out, what, this is not a place that peacekeepers can operate. There's not much political will behind a peacekeeping.
Right. No.
Don't get your hopes up because it's not going to happen.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's just sort of. I guess it's amazing. We have to acknowledge. You were saying that the world doesn't care enough about Darfur. That's why the copters aren't forthcoming, or people don't use their leverage with China. But people don't care at all. I mean, it's right. And it was just I guess, and then you could almost ask yourself, I guess Somalia is more dangerous than Darfur, right? I mean, if you look at the UN going forward in one locale, and in the other one saying it's not even worth thinking about it. We've been asked to look at it, but it's too dangerous for us. We're not going.
Yeah, it seems that the two territories are being compared now because of the rampant lawlessness that's just endemic to both places right now. But I guess the key point about Somalia, at least, is at one point, a major power was willing to go in alone there. Right,
and for Black Hawk Down reasons, nobody else. Right. Yeah. No. How about this? This is not a very artful transition, but just to the side of Sudan, of Darfur, is a country called Chad. And, and there's been, I think people may have seen these stories. There's been a lot of controversy, at least here at the UN, but I think certainly in Chad as well, and in Sudan, about it's kind of a tragic story about a France-based non-profit NGO called Zoe's Ark, L'Arche de Zoé, that on paper said that they were saving Darfur orphans and taking them to a better life in France, but was stopped by Chadian authorities and accused of kidnapping and child trafficking. Right.
Now, it seems rightfully so. According to these reports we're seeing from journalists who traveled with Zoe's Ark.
Sure.
It seems that, in fact, they were kidnapping and trafficking in children.
Were these journalists
Am I
actually
wrong?
traveling with them, and what?
Yeah, no, they had a couple journalists traveling with them, and apparently, like one of the journalists was a videographer who sort of captured on tape members of Zoe's Ark sort of placing bandages on perfectly healthy kids' heads to make them look like they're infirmed, so as to spirit them to their a more loving home in France, right?
Wow, no. Well, that moves it, because what I was as you might imagine, the part of the story that grabbed me most, but that I could pursue from here was UN assistance to Zoe's Ark, and there have been admissions by both UNHCR, the refugee agency, and UNICEF, the children's agency, that both of them assisted the group. Again, no one is saying that UNICEF is a kidnapper, right? But the question becomes, if it was, what does it take to get UN assistance to fly kids out of a country? Go ahead, tell me.
First of all, what is assist? Like,
where's the assistance? Zoe's Ark approached the two agencies and said, "We're moving kids out of the country. We need help." No, and they didn't give them planes.
And how did that assistance then manifest itself?
Okay, it looks like UNHCR gave substantially more than UNICEF. UNICEF is saying $130. That's all what we gave them was worth, and they're laying it off on a single, quote, junior level international staff member in Abeche in Chad, and saying that she erred by not checking a database of UN sort of known and authorized NGOs, which they say is a database that's maintained by the UN's Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Assistance. The only reason I gave that long story is to say, earlier today, I asked the head of the Office of Coordination of Humanitarian Assistance if they have such a database, and he said they don't.
Okay.
So I guess the question sort of becomes, and again, it might be like, you of course, blaming the UN for kidnapping. It's not that, but the question is, the UN is in countries all over the world. So what safeguards are in place? You can't a rogue. It's a separate question saying how do you arrest
a crazy French group from kidnapping kids? I don't think this is like
absolutely no. Well,
problem.
I guess it's two different things. From the UN's perspective, wouldn't it seem important to say, we've learned something from this? UNHCR admits that it gave tents, kerosene. It essentially helped the caravan of children move across to the airport to be flown out.
Well, was like UNHCR also then sort of defrauded by these people?
No, exactly.
Seems like they're fraud artists.
Sure. But wouldn't? And I guess I almost think this might seem like a small case, but I think we're locking horns around it, because the idea it's not a question of blaming the UN.
Yeah.
But I think if one automatically defends the UN and says they were just as defrauded as everyone else, what keeps it from happening again? Like it's not rocket science to say, what should the UN system do when a seemingly well-meaning but apparently unknown NGO appears in Chad and says, "Help us move children to France"? I guess either I'm asking you, or is it unreasonable to say that they should have some policies in place?
The policies are good.
Right.
They should have policies. It just seems to me like this has like a lot to do with a lot of different subjects. This is the first. Maybe this is the first time I'm hearing that like UNHCR or UNICEF had anything to do with this.
Sure.
I just like it just seems like peripheral to like the larger story.
Right. No, and I think I tried to preface that by saying that jumped out at me because it's something I can pursue here. I mean, the actual Zoe's Ark people are in jail.
Listen, to the extent that there's any complicity in this crazy kidnapping scheme, that ought to be investigated.
Right.
To me, at least, like the more interesting sort of angle of this whole Zoe's Ark kidnapping scheme, I guess you can call it, is sort of like how it affected the French-Chadian relationship.
Right.
Because
totally.
so you have this president in Chad, Idriss Déby, who's essentially like propped up there by the French military, which is a garrison in Chad. Not too far from the capital, and a year ago, as sort of forces as Janjaweed forces were and their allies were sort of storming the capital. You had like the French start to flex their muscle and help repel.
They dropped a bomb.
Attack.
Yeah, they dropped a bomb next to the marching rebels.
Exactly, and so you have this the French government keeping Déby in power. Not the most uncorrupt guy in the world, and it's just kind of shocking to me
that he would take such a strong stance.
That he could take such a strong stance, and I guess it's obviously for domestic political reasons. Yeah. But take a strong stance and say, we're going to punish these people here. Similarly, so you have this last or 2 months ago, the French decided that they want to lead not a peacekeeping force but a multinational force in Chad, in eastern Chad, to protect the Darfur refugee camps. It's a small force, and it's not like a traditional peacekeeping force. It's they'll have a Security Council mandate, but they'll be there to protect. They'll be there with the consent of Debbie to protect, like Darfur camps. And it seems to me that there's complicated layers of this relationship that are being exposed by.
No, definitely, and that probably is. No, absolutely. I agree. One sort of strange footnote to that whole France coming to Debbie's assistance last year.
Yeah.
There people made this connection. Number one, it was sort of whispered that like China might somehow either be behind or be arming those rebels. I'm not kidding you. And the funny thing is that once they were marching on the capital, and right in the midst of that, Chad suddenly changed from recognizing Taiwan to recognizing China. I'm not kidding you. You can look it up. So it's sort of.
I'll have
again, no, really. And I'm also not. This is just a fluke that it ties back into the Iran thing. I'm really not saying that all global conflicts are explained by like the Dalai Lama or Taiwan. But seriously, there's
a unified field theory.
No, there's a lot. There's a lot
yes.
going on there. And it is. Sarkozy tried to distance himself from Zoe's Ark very quickly. Yeah. I guess I don't actually see the reason I don't see the UN piece as being peripheral. It's being. I'm here. I can pursue it. But I honestly think I think around the globe, other than the UN is in most humanitarian hotspots on Earth. And they should be there, and they're there.
The worst places.
Yeah. Let's put it this way. To Zoe's Ark, in order to accomplish this, the UN wasn't peripheral. They sought their assistance because they're the ones with people on the ground and assistance to give. So it would be, it's not, I think here's the thing. It doesn't turn on whether you blame the UN for what happened with these 103 children. But I think it is important to say the world's multinational, multilateral humanitarian agency, it'll be much better if rather than sort of say, this is not our fault and going on exactly the same way, they say, you know what, we are learning from this. This has been, let's try to make sure, without saying that we acknowledge, that this is not our fault. This is Zoe's Ark's fault, right? But let's make sure that in 100, today we had a briefing about Bangladesh. There's a cyclone that hit it, more than 1,000 people were killed. The UN's OCHA is saying, WFP has the biscuits. Everything's going on. So anytime there's a crisis, the UN is there, And so it seems important to sort of it's nice to be in the heat of the moment, we just help who's ever coming. But, you look at the U.S. They've started to, try to certify people that could help in, terrorist sites, right? Because, some of the people that went I'm just totally mixing issues. Some of the people that went to Ground Zero, stole watches out of the basement of the freaking Lower World Trade Towers, right? It's nice to be nice, but then you learn, a little bit of control is a good idea, too, right?
Yeah.
All right. Sorry to mix.
No, maybe how's this switching continents?
Please, yeah.
Pakistan.
All right.
Now, what caught my eye, I guess from a UN perspective, is that you have Munir Akram, who's one of the sort of smoothest and most skilled diplomats in the UN. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, they always use the word smooth. You can't see Munir Akram's name in print without the word smooth or suave or silky. Sometimes they call him silky.
So he's all three. He's the perm rep, the Pakistani ambassador to the UN, and he currently holds the chair of the G77, which is the sort of the pretty powerful group of I think 120 developing countries that are a pretty powerful voting bloc in the General Assembly and in various UN committees. And you had Ban Ki-moon when General Musharraf issued sort of his martial law. You had Ban Ki-moon saying in pretty strong terms for UN Secretary General that the Pakistani government needs to restore rule of law. And this was not sort of greeted well, I believe, by Munir Akram.
No, he called them in for a meeting almost immediately and said, this is an internal matter.
Yeah.
Yep. And then...
So how has been the fallout to that sort of, you have a powerful perm rep, and you have, on one side, and you have the Secretary General on the other, sort of butting heads here.
That was definitely I mean, I think Ban Ki-moon has been, ever since he made that statement, he's been traveling. So it's been, but he was asked. His spokesperson was asked.
Among other places to Antarctica.
He went to Antarctica. He went to an ethanol plant. He went to Tunisia. He went to Beirut. He's been all over.
Yeah.
He's definitely he's been on the move. He denied that the Antarctica trip was ecotourism explicitly, but but his spokespeople have said he stands behind his statement. So it was.
Okay.
I think it was very. It's interesting. I mean, the only thing I can add to it, in a way, I was saying like Akram. Most people here say that he wants to work for the UN system. Just so you know, as a personal matter, he's been their perm rep for some time, but he's very well respected in the UN system, and it's so widely reputed that it's basically true that he's put his hat in the ring for a few Undersecretary General jobs, FYI.
Okay.
One in Geneva, one in New York. So it's kind of, to me, it was almost like the meta story is, how is this going to affect his chances? Doing his job for Pakistan, i.e., if Musharraf calls him up and says, you must protest on my behalf, he's going to do it. Does this in any way undermine his chances to be viewed as a good multilateralist and be given at the end of his service of Pakistan a nice job? I don't think it does. So I know that sort of collapsed down the question. I think what was interesting is that Ban Ki-moon has been very cautious in what he said. So the fact that he didn't only say release prisoners, because that's a no-brainer, right? But he did say restore the rule of law.
Yeah.
I think that either it shows that Ban Ki-moon is on fire for democracy and all that is good and right, or there's a more cynical explanation, which is that this is also the U.S.'s position. Right? I mean, Bush did say that.
Well, it's all like freedom-loving people's position around the world, I think.
But I guess it would be, I actually had it just arose today. Another journalist here I was speaking with, we were marveling at that too. It was surprising. I think people were actually genuinely surprised that he included rule of law and didn't
it's kind of a bold statement coming from, it's not a bold statement because, it's the right thing to do, but it's a bold statement coming from
but I think the cynical view, and I'll actually, let me ascribe the cynical view to my unnamed interlocutor, that if you were to line up the few, but certainly half dozen or maybe there's a dozen matters on which Ban Ki-moon has spoken and been criticized by one or more member states, is there any one of them in which the position he took wasn't also the position of the United States? That's the threat. That's a factual question that we can dig up.
Well, I think if you look at the issue of climate change, there's certainly a lot of daylight between the position of the Bush administration and the position of Ban Ki-moon.
Right.
And that's like that's like Ban Ki-moon's signature issue as well.
Right.
So you have an issue that Ban Ki-moon is staking his reputation on is an issue at which the United States is in another sort of dimension.
No, definitely. But you'll also notice. I mean, I don't think he's not one for saying the EU proposal goes 40% reductions by X, Y, and Z. He takes a pretty like mom and apple pie generalist view.
He's I think taking the fundamental approach, the fundamental difference between the Bush administration's position and Ban Ki-moon's position is that Ban Ki-moon believes and has said that we ought to have binding emissions reductions in a legally binding international instrument, and that is like the key point of contention between Ban Ki-moon and freedom-loving people around the world, and and the Bush administration, which loves a different kind of freedom, a freedom from
actually that's a very
by international law that requires them to reduce the emissions.
But so I actually think you've blown that bet out of the water. At least I guess I was thinking of like diplomatic Sturm und Drang. So then the question becomes: did the U.S. or a question is did the U.S. not sufficiently vet Ban Ki-moon about his priorities before so openly championing him to become the Secretary General? Because this is the last you and I have spoken, but it's maybe time to bring onto the scene the tell-all memoir of John Bolton.
Well, I was reaching for my book.
There we go. I'm reaching for mine.
So you're talking about vetting.
Or do you still have your paper cover on yours?
I have I actually bought the real version here. I gave Mr. Bolton $30. I figure I should
That's where you and I differ.
donate $30 to like Greenpeace or something to offset whatever damage I might have done.
Sure, it's like carbon offsetting. It's a Bolton offsetting program.
Right.
He does say, I guess the segue to me was he says that he quotes.
Sorry, I should read the title of the book first.
Okay,
we have
please.
John Bolton, Surrender is Not an Option.
There we go.
Defending America at the United Nations and Abroad. Dun, dun, dun.
Very good. I wasn't actually. As you see, I wanted to be able to quote it without promoting it, but you seem to. You've gone whole hog. You have a lot more karma to work off.
I wrote a review of it in the American Prospect magazine.
There you go.
And that's where I need to actually check the quotes. The quotes in the advanced version versus the quotes of the published version. So I felt sort of a journalistic obligation to buy the book.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay, sure. Gotcha. No, well, you've explained it, but to me that.
So actually, I have a question for you.
Go ahead.
So
we had a segue.
As I write in my review, and what's shocking to me about the book is, I've watched Bolton for a long time. Mm-hmm. I wrote a blog for a while called Bolton Watch.
Sure.
What's shocking to me about this book is not the content so much, but the sort of animosity to which John Bolton feels about one person in particular.
Jones Perry.
Amir Jones Perry, the British ambassador to the UN.
Yep.
Tony Blair's man at the UN. In this book comes across, or Bolton portrays, as his sort of deepest and darkest enemy at the UN. He calls him sort of unsparingly an EU-roid, whatever that means. He calls him
he calls him limp-wristed
to America's Rome, which to Bolton is no compliment at all.
Sure, he calls him limp-wristed. Just throwing that in there.
And he calls him limp-wristed. He's pretty merciless in his description of the ambassador of our greatest ally is fighting beside us in 2 wars. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering how did folks up in Turtle Bay sort of receive that and take that book.
That's okay. And
were
definitely.
You as shocked as I was?
No, sure. I'm sorry to do this, but I wanted the initial thread of segue here, and it's just it's a quote. If people what's most surprising about the book is not it definitely has mean-spirited. It's mean-spirited, but it really is a tell-all book in the sense that there are very few books either to its credit or
to its credit.
There are very few books that describe in great detail what's said in closed consultations with the Security Council, or he's burning all his bridges, Bolton, because he quotes Condi Rice.
Bridges. Yeah,
he quotes. This was the meager segue point, but it is.
Yeah.
This is amazing. He quotes and puts it in quotes. He doesn't.
Yeah.
Condoleezza Rice as saying, "We support Ban Ki-moon because maybe we don't want a strong Secretary General." So this. Yeah. So one, this is it's not that he was offending Ban Ki-moon. He's also like, I don't think Condoleezza Rice wants to be quoted saying that. But I think then the question to me the question is this, he makes it very clear that basically it was the U.S. and China. When there was a meeting of the mind of them on Ban Ki-moon, that was it. He's in. But you would have thought, because there were a number, the book describes a number of meetings with Ban Ki-moon, and definitely shows Ban Ki-moon in full campaigning for the job, from very early on. But so in these meetings, you would have thought the U.S. would have said, "What are going to be your main priorities?" And I don't think that Ban Ki-moon would have said, Darfur, and I think he must have listed it, right? Unless, there's some real cynics here said, looked back at his history in South Korea and said, when did you ever mention the word environment? Maybe he's grown into it. Maybe he's like the mythical Supreme Court justice who's totally middle of the road, and the moment he's nominated, he becomes Thurgood Marshall. Right. Or maybe
this is much, I think, to Bolton's chagrin.
Right. Or maybe this is the ultimate finger in the wind. Yeah. Finger in the wind. Sort of. It is a good strategy. It's not a good strategy. Right. It's a good issue, and it's one on which the UN should lead. So.
Right. Yeah. Right. So God bless him for taking it up. We said this before. It's the extent that Kofi Annan made human rights issues sort of central to everything that the UN does. I think that. Sort of that was Kofi Annan's issue. It was the human rights. Kofi Annan was the human rights Secretary General. Mm-hmm. It looks like Ban Ki-moon is shaping up to be the climate change Secretary General, and injecting that into sort of the day-to-day operations of the UN and UN priorities.
Absolutely. He certainly. There's no question that it's if a candidate did this, if Mitt Romney did this, just to mix issues, people would say, well, his pollsters must say it's a big issue. You know what I mean? But it is a big issue. Ban
Ki-moon, he's not. As John Bolton will tell you that Ban Ki-moon works for the member states, not the other way around.
Right.
So all he has to do is really please the P5. And it seems that John Bolton, as he says frequently throughout the book, was looking for someone who could be an administrator, not as he would, as he says, a secular pope.
No, definitely. I'm just because we're sort of. The only thing I would say is that I don't want to say real environmentalists. Maybe that's wrong. But I think, and maybe it's maybe because the UN is what it is, just what you said. They have to they represent and deal with member states. I'll just give you an example. The UN's head guy, sort of, on climate change is this Ivo de Boer, right?
Yes.
So he's come to the UN a number of times, and he's clearly a highly respected and very deft politician. But he goes out of his way to say the war on global warming is not a war on oil. And when asked about, I think there are many environmental groups that say, Al Gore himself says there should be a moratorium on coal, the opening of new coal plants until technology actually exists to capture it and have it not be as and you don't see, Ivo de Boer asked directly about this, said, there's really not that much of a problem with coal. It goes well beyond coal. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I think, again, it may just be, they're quite centrist in their environmentalism. I guess I'll just put it that way. So maybe it's a form of environmentalism that countries like China, for example, which has coal and wants to burn it, and the U.S. that wants to just, wants to burn anything.
Well, I think necessarily they have to be pragmatic because, it's the extent that, the big goal of Ban Ki-moon's administration is going to be securing a post-Kyoto climate change agreement. Mm-hmm. They need as many countries, particularly the developed countries that haven't signed Kyoto, or that haven't ratified Kyoto, like the United States and Australia, as well as the developing world, like China and India, sign on to Kyoto. And so Kyoto, will expire in 2015. Mm-hmm. So the goal is to sort of put together a post-Kyoto climate change agreement that can essentially restore global emissions levels to something of what they were in 1990.
And they're going to Bali to discuss just this, which will be, I'm sure, for some future we can kick that one around.
Right. I should say, very quickly that next month, the first big sort of meeting of member states on how to deal with the post-Kyoto world is taking place in Bali next month. And in this meeting, they're not going to really be talking about the substance of what they need to accomplish. It'll be more like a process meeting. They're going to need to talk about sort of how to get to the substance, sort of what, because, there's going to be sort of 3 years, really, of negotiation until, we're going to have some sort of substantive agreement on climate change issues. Mm-hmm. So that's actually, folks are geared up to at the UN. Am I correct?
No, absolutely.
Yes.
He's going to Bali, and that was a big. He not even he claims, but his trip, this whole tour that he's on. When he was in Brazil, he went to an ethanol plant. There's a side.
Visited California, and Governor Schwarzenegger visited a green technology plant.
There's a side issue here where there's this somewhat renegade UN special rapporteur, expert on the right to food, Jean Ziegler, who came to the UN recently and said that the changing the use of land from producing food to producing biofuels is, quote, a crime against humanity.
Well, I mean, I can't speak to what he said.
That's what he said.
But it's a pretty it's a pretty big deal. This idea of biofuels are seen as this really environmentally friendly, great solution, not solution, at least part of the solution to renewable energy and climate change issues. Yet, using food for fuel as opposed for food, rises, increases food prices.
Absolutely. But then some people,
harms poor people. So it's a pretty, it's a pretty dynamic issue, I think.
So can I actually, believe it or not, I actually asked Ban Ki-moon about this right before he went on his trip. He did a stakeout for reporters about, and most people were like, what about Lebanon? But he seemed to he latched on. He said, well, it is a balance because of the MDGs, and you have to. But now he's gotten a letter supposedly from this sort of biofuels trade associations on 3 continents saying you must denounce your because they thought that what he said, literally, they quote what he said at the stakeout in response to the question, was too strong because he acknowledged that it is like a balancing test. And then these guys came back blazing and were like, you need, and so now he's clarified the statement. He made a statement in Brazil, which is that it is a balancing test, but the balancing test is decidedly up to each country and is its own business. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, again, there's a little nuance to it, but.
No. It's interesting. Should we stop it there?
The only thing I will say, and because this may be, well, I don't know if it would be the last time you'll see me from here. There's another reason that it might be, but there was a threat by New York Mayor Mike Bloomberg to henceforth stop allowing public school kids to visit the UN.
Yeah.
Unless the UN meets certain deadlines, which Bloomberg claims they committed to and now are backsliding on, to install fire partitions. Go ahead.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but the mayor's sister is the one who is making these threats?
She's the one signing the letters. I don't think she does it without her brother's tacit approval, of course.
Now what's her actual position?
She is New York City's commissioner for the UN consular affairs and protocol. They always have such a person that deals with the UN.
Is this always? I mean, it's the name of this position screams patronage, and the fact that it's Bloomberg's sister.
That is pretty extraordinary. No, but the position is.
I could be wrong. I know. I'll admit ignorance to the inner workings of the New York City government.
Sure, but it's a major employer.
You live in New York. Is this? It smells like patronage.
I think putting your sister in the job is putting your sister in the job is patronage. But the position
called like consular affairs for the city of New York.
Consular affairs and protocol.
Yeah,
I mean,
and protocol.
The question is, it has a very high sounding office. They clearly would need at least a desk in the police department to deal. For example, when Ahmadinejad came and said, "I want to visit Ground Zero," before Bloomberg could say you can't. They had to have a desk that could say, no, for security reasons, you can't, right?
Okay.
You see what I mean? And there is also this ongoing, it's sort of dealt with through the State Department, but it's also a New York City matter. The New York Post loves this issue, but it is the issue of parking tickets. Right? That's a city. So there are, and as they say, actually, I mean, here in New York, there's been this big controversy about a building near Ground Zero that has been empty for 5 years. It's owned by Deutsche Bank, or at least they call it the Deutsche Bank building. It caught fire. There was no standpipe sort of running sprinklers inside the building, and 2 firemen died. So this was a big. And so actually, the reality is it's not just that there's this legal issue of whether the city could get into the building here, which is the UN, scrupulously guards its independence and that this is international territory. Yeah. I mean, they literally will. There are a lot of legal issues. Anytime
you're allowed to smoke inside the UN building.
That's one of the reasons, absolutely.
So, there you go,
But much worse, I mean, much more practical is that even if there were, I'll knock on whatever I have here. If there were a fire in the UN's, landmark 39-story tower, it's not just that there's a legal issue of getting the fire department here. In fact, fire trucks could not approach the building because it said that the pavement above the garage wasn't built to handle today's fire trucks.
Right. No, we should say the UN building.
Go ahead.
Is it's a pretty beautiful building from the exterior.
Sure.
The interior is sort of decrepit.
Well, nothing's been done since it was built.
It hasn't been updated or renovated since it was built.
Sure.
And so the UN, after many years, member states have finally approved money for a big renovation, and that's just getting underway.
It hasn't actually, believe it or not, the UN is at the last moment wanting to change the plan. So until they get approval from that, not all bets are off. I mean, maybe that's getting too arcane, but there's actually a big. They're watching with closely to see if the General Assembly approves this new. Because they're already $200 and some million over budget. Not to be a UN basher. That's their own number.
Yeah.
But so to make this up, what they've decided to do, they were initially going to move. They were going to move 10 stories out at a time of people and move them to a rented building nearby, fix the 10 floors, move them back in, move the other 10. Now they've decided, and the staff union here said that's crazy, we don't want to work with the asbestos. And apparently with Ban Ki-moon getting hands-on involved, it was decided to move everybody out at one shot. And so and that's the thing, that it's going to cost somewhat more because they're going to have to rent a lot more space. The GA has to approve it.
So the entire UN building is going to be sort of empty?
It's going to stand empty for at least 3 years. They're going to move Ban Ki-moon, the Secretary General, to a temporary building on this, what they call the North Lawn. There's a big lawn just north of the UN. They're going to build a building there that will house the General Assemblies for like 2 or 3 years, and they're going to
Wow.
put Ban Ki-moon in it. The press is obviously saying, where are they going to put us? And
Yeah, right.
they're going to put us in
Where-
the basement of the library. That's the current story.
Basement of the library. They'll put you on a float on the East River.
No, they like.
Yeah.
No, but actually, I mean, that's going back to just so it's not. I mean, those are the facts. But the speculation is as follows: why would Bloomberg be suddenly playing hardball with the UN? Because the UN, what it says, and it's not unreasonable. They said, look, we admit we have all these problems. We don't have sprinklers, but we're just about to spend $1.4 billion fixing it up. There's no reason to order us to make like hundreds of thousands of dollars of fixes with sprinklers when we're just about to rip them all out. And one would have thought Bloomberg would have said, okay. But in fact, he's coming on strong and saying, no dice, you got to do it. So a lot of people are saying, why would he do this, right? There are two schools of thought.
His political ambitions, perhaps?
Say again?
Are you sort of speculating that might be his political ambitions?
Oh well, that number one. I think now we can go back to that. We can say if he's going to run, either as as an independent, but trying to equally reach out to not only just Republicans. Like there's not a lot of downside bashing the UN. Would you agree?
Well, sure. I mean, actually, that's something I document frequently on UN Dispatch. Is the sort of tendency and the propensity of candidates on the way to Election Day bashing the UN for pretty frivolous reasons. Like you had Mitt Romney saying before Ahmadinejad's visit that he should be like indicted for genocide, or he should be barred from speaking and indicted for genocide and arrested and conditioning funding for the UN on whether or not the UN indicts Ahmadinejad for genocide. Whether disregarding the fact that the UN is not a international prosecutor. Just sort of indict people. That's besides the fact. It's just sort of this UN bashing that candidates.
No, that's why I thought it was right in your wheelhouse.
Well, you also had Fred Thompson doing something similar as well, saying that the UN, he wrote a letter to the Field and Stream, a blog for Field and Stream magazine, the Gun Nut blog, railing against the UN's secret plot to take Americans' guns away.
What about the Field people? There's some people that read the magazine for for Field.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't call them all nuts. Those Field people are okay.
No. Sorry, the blog is called Gun Nut Blog.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Sorry. No.
All right.
I don't mean to disrespect people
Granted,
who
then
have
I read
firearms.
Field
I think
Nut.
that's not
I read
the
the Field
point.
Nut blog. So I just.
Yeah. No. I mean, I think generally, I can't profess to be a frequent reader of Gun Nut Blog, but I think it's more a blog about sort of rifle hunting technology.
I'm going to call that hyperbole.
Yeah.
I'm going to call it.
It's hyperbole, but I think perhaps they cater to a certain audience that Fred Thompson was trying to connect with by railing against the UN secret plot to take your guns away.
And here comes Bloomberg. Do you see what I'm saying?
Here comes Bloomberg.
That's the first theory, and then there's the more New York specific theory, which is that, as with most things in New York, it's all about the real estate. That in fact Bloomberg would like the UN, because the UN beyond its landmark 38-story tower also has a couple of other buildings across the street, which are not technically really international territory, which the city would like to have back and put on the tax rolls. Because imagine it is a big chunk of Midtown, of the side of Midtown, not paying any taxes.
Like Dag Hammarskjöld Plaza?
Oh, totally. So the idea is that maybe the unsaid game here is to try to get more of the UN. Some of the people are going to be moved across the river to Long Island City. Many of the people actually clamor via the staff union to say they want to make sure they can come back. You know what I mean? But that there may be sort of some real estate pressure behind. I think the political one is probably more on the money.
No, I don't. I personally don't think he's going to run. So I think you might be right on that.
Right. The real estate is the explanation. Anyway,
anyway, I think it's something that every New York mayor likes to. Engaged in a little UN bashing particularly around.
I wonder where you stand on this. Are you ready? In the most, it's arcane, but I think it's here's a litmus, not even a litmus test. Is this maybe it's U.S. bashing, or maybe it's the UN has something called the host country committee, and it meets about it's the venue for member states and their people that come to the UN from other countries to complain about the U.S.'s restrictions on them, right? So last year there was this big standoff where the foreign minister of Venezuela says that he was, strip searched and pistol whipped. That actually wasn't what happened, but he was treated unfairly
Right.
And Bolton, it's actually back to Bolton's book. Bolton writes about it. Bolton calls it a big fiasco and says, but he also notes that
they're very quick to call a press conference.
Exactly. That he immediately said, he was screaming to his cell phone, call a press conference.
Yeah.
But so this year, the complaints are a lot more down market. I mean, they're a little smaller, but they do exist. For example, the delegate of Cuba complains that the U.S. has to, because the U.S. hosts the United Nations, it has to allow in any, legitimate, certified delegate of any country that's a member of the United Nations to UN meetings, right? So once they allowed in like Karadzik, and they told him he could, but they're allowed to impose conditions. They said you can only move between the Hyatt on 42nd and Lexington and the UN, nowhere else.
Right.
Normally the rules for like North Korean diplomats or Cuban diplomats are you can only go within 25 miles of Columbus Circle, 59th Street and 8th Avenue. Why that was chosen as like ground zero, I don't know. But so the Cuban delegate has complained, saying they wanted to attend a conference about the International Criminal Court, held by the Mission of Liechtenstein, held at Princeton University. And the U.S. State Department said, more than 25 miles, screw you. And so they complained to the host country committee, and they said, this is terrible, this was a UN meeting. The U.S. responded, it really wasn't an official UN meeting, and 25 miles is 25 miles.
Yeah.
Where do you stand,
Mark? I mean, I can't imagine, the ICC is not, the International Criminal Court is not the UN.
Right, there we go.
It seems
so
to
are
me...
you siding? Which side are you on? This is why I'm calling it a litmus test question.
A litmus test? Do I...
Who's wronged here?
Frankly, I don't think Cuba is much of a champion of sort of war crimes law, international human rights law. And if you look at the debate leading up to the creation of the Human Rights Council, they were singularly disruptive.
Gotcha.
So I'm not sympathetic to Cubans' complaints that they can't make it to the ICC.
All right.
So there you go.
No, that's good. That's where I was.
Fully think that the ICC should have as many member states as possible. I think the United States should join the International Criminal Court and lend it some legitimacy and support its work to bring war criminals to justice throughout the world.
Well, very deft there. I thought you might have been at the decoy bait and said, there goes the Bush administration being unilateral and not allowing a member state to go to the ICC. But well done.
I'd like
sometimes
to
both sides are
we
wrong.
Look at this, practically, pragmatically.
Well, all right then.
Good.
You've passed the test.
Well, until next time, Matthew.
Well, I'm sure. I think we'll have bigger game to hunt next time. Some of these items may have been small, but I'm feeling some big ticket diplomatic issues coming down the pike.
Things are coming down the pipe. We have Kosovo coming down the pipe.
That's correct.
We have
we need absolutely. There's all hell is
more Darfur. Yeah.
Mark it on your calendar, December 10th, Kosovo.
Yeah. Well, maybe we should talk about that real quick.
Okay.
So you said December 10th.
Yep.
December 10th is the day on which the contact group for Kosovo, which is Russia, Germany representing the EU, and the United States, present their recommendation to the Security Council on what to do with Kosovo. Now, chances are, if things proceed as they're going now, there will be really no recommendation to give because the negotiations currently underway are stalled. So the government, the ethnic Albanian government of Kosovo has said that they will declare independence unilaterally on sometime after December 10th, should the Security Council not grant them sovereignty. And this is sort of lining up to be a diplomatic clusterfuck of sorts.
Totally.
Pardon my French.
No.
Because I spoke to someone at the...
It's a term of art.
Yes, a term of art. I spoke to someone at the United States Institute of Peace about this earlier this week, and the point he made was that so should Kosovo make good on this threat, which in all likelihood they will, because the government there has really staked its credibility on this independence issue. They would declare sort of independence from Kosovo, from Serbia. The Serbian government then would sort of be in this position to really make a lot of trouble. The Serb majority portions of Kosovo would likely secede.
Right.
Republika Srpska,
correct,
which is the 49% of Bosnia's territory, was a It was a republic created by the Dayton Accords in 1995, which is this ethnic Serb enclave that covers half of Bosnia, would likely secede from the Dayton Accords, essentially.
They've made that threat.
Yeah, they've made that threat, would maybe likely join Serbia, and sort of the background to all this will be this big conflict between the United States and Russia. The United States has basically said that it would support Kosovo's independence. Russia has assuredly said the opposite. So you'll have sort of this almost an old Cold War fight between the two powers in the region. And Europe, meanwhile, will be split. Europe has said that some European countries are willing to recognize an independent Kosovo, some aren't. And, of course, this puts into question Kosovo's sort of donors. Europe is essentially propping up the Kosovo's budget right now. So it's a whole lot of uncertainty coming down the road. And
I think most, I don't know, most people that you speak to would say, I mean, again, like you were saying, freedom-loving people everywhere. It seems, having conducted an unscientific poll of such freedom-loving people, I think most of them that I speak to seem to believe Kosovo should be independent. It's kind of, they view it as like East Timor or any number of things. Or almost like decolonization, like let the people be free. Serbia and Russia's argument is, and it's something that we talked about earlier in this discussion. If sovereignty is king, what's going on here? Do you see what I mean? Like this was a part of Serbia, and the UN. There was in 1999 a sort of a ceasefire was reached on the idea that Serbia wasn't losing this area, but it would because of its ethnic difference and the fight. It would be administered by the UN. Now the UN is saying, well, hey, we've administered it for so long, it's different. Let's go. I mean, the UN is on record. The UN has made a recommendation in this that independence should be granted. I'm not at all taking the Russian or Serbian side. I'm just saying.
No. I think, at least ethically speaking, you can make the argument that Serbia gave up its claims of sovereignty to Kosovo when it started slaughtering Kosovar Albanians in 1999.
But I don't. The only thing I would say is that there are at least 5 conflicts around the world that come to mind that are very similar. These 2 of them are in Georgia. One involves Abkhazia. One involves South Ossetia. One is in Moldova. One is between Armenia and Azerbaijan. We could go down the line. We could talk about Western Sahara. And we could say in all of these places, it appears that if you held a referendum in the breakaway region, the people would say, we want to be free. But nobody's giving them a referendum.
Well, I think what distinguishes
and they feel
Kosovo
they were slaughtered too. That was the point.
I think what distinguishes Kosovo from those regions is that Kosovo is being administered by the United Nations. Kosovo is a trustee.
We may have actually said this before. This actually, I guess it's not just to be kind of a smartass or make problems. That is the difference in a sense. But then I think the UN, it's too late. They can't take anything back. But stepping back for a moment, although some people would say, why is Sudan being so obstreperous and not wanting the UN in Darfur? What they say is, we don't want our country cut up. And if the UN is willing to openly, this is, I guess, the distinction, make the argument that any place where they step in and come to kind of administer can, down the road, whatever commitment was made to the genocidal central power, say, hey, we've run it now, it's going to be independent. Don't be surprised when other tyrants and genocidaires don't want the UN in, right? I mean, every action has a reaction, and every precedent is a precedent, even though everyone. What they always say about Kosovo is it's sui generis. It's not. This is like it's not a precedent, but of course it is. It's only not a precedent if you think you should have this result, but you don't want to follow the logic for other places. Because if you live in Abkhazia, you say you were mistreated. Right?
Right. I mean, I do think, though, that as I said, what distinguishes Kosovo right now is that it's one of 2 places on Earth, the other being East Timor a few years ago, that have been sort of like just a country without its sovereignty. It's a country that is being administered by the United Nations.
Serbia was told in 1999 that it retained full sovereignty, but was only giving up.
It still retains sovereignty on paper, if not, the thing is,
which is why they're boycotting their elections coming up this weekend.
Independent.
And Serbia has recommended to its ethnic Serbs, and the ethnic Serbs there have said they're boycotting it, much to the UN chagrin. The UN says you should vote. Serbia says we don't recognize the vote. I mean, it's almost like it's not to be contrarian, but I don't. What do you say to the argument that says that's fine and good, but if you're saying as a matter of principle, what makes it fair to distinguish Kosovo from Abkhazia or Transnistria or South Ossetia or Western Sahara is that the UN is administered. What is that a bad precedent for getting the UN into breakaway or unhappy or rebellious parts of other countries? If you're willing to say it's a legitimate argument to say, well, we've been there, therefore now it's time for a referendum.
I think that Serbia, by doing what it did to Kosovo, much like what Sudan has done to Darfur, gives up claims of sovereignty when you start slaughtering your own citizens. You sort of, I think, effectively you shed any claim you might make over sort of being the custodian of that territory. I think the argument is probably more ethical than it is legal, strictly speaking. But I think it stands nonetheless.
But can you? I guess I'm saying throwing that all. Then is Khartoum's resistance and sort of incremental resistance and troublemaking about having the UN get into Darfur, is it incomprehensible to you?
No, it's not incomprehensible at all. What's incomprehensible to me about the situation is that the U.S. and that China and that other countries aren't, forcing Khartoum to accept the UN peacekeeping force. They're not sort of forcing Khartoum to make a series of bad decisions. They're not presenting Khartoum with a series of bad choices.
Making the other alternatives
and that's the problem. And so there's it's reasonable that Sudan wouldn't want international forces on their territory. I think that though they've lost a claim though to prevent that.
All right.
I'm running out of time.
Okay, no, definitely. No, I just
but this is good.
We can,
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Totally.
And let's chat again soon.
Okay, excellent.
All right,
okay.
Great. Thanks a lot as always, Matt.
Excellent.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.